Great. Well, nice to see some new faces and some old faces that I already know. Just as a quick introduction, my name's Toby Henry. I'm the CEO at Accelerator Solutions. This webinar was really important for us to get out quite quickly. There's some legislation changes in October this year around sexual harassment, and we've had a few of our clients reach out to us proactively around how can we help them. And given how important this is as a topic, we wanted to put something out there which was informational for our clients, people who are just interested from a HR perspective. Because when we started to look at this and build out some of the materials and content with our current clients, the statistics are, I actually was really blown away by about some of the statistics which we'll go through today. We've got a fantastic team of people from both HR and our training team who are going to walk you through the content in the next 30 minutes. We've got a lot to get through in the next 30 minutes. And if you want to stay on for 15 minutes and ask any either HR related questions or general questions about how we can help, we'll keep the webinar open, so feel free to stay on. So what we're going to go through in the next 30 minutes, we're going to do a quick intro to our team. We'll go through some sexual harassment statistics just to get you thinking about how prevalent this is and then what we can do about it. And then Jack's going to talk through about the changes specifically to the sexual harassment legislation and key items that you need to know about. And then we'll go into some scenarios and discussion because, as you'll see, and as you probably already know, this is not black and white, it's very grey. So we'll talk through some of those scenarios and then some tangible tips to take away. So things you can actually take hopefully into your day jobs on Monday to be slightly better or help the organisation. So with that, I will be quiet and hand over to the people who know about this. Stuart, Sarah, Jack, over to you guys.
Thanks, Toby. Morning, everybody. Stuart, as Toby's rightly said there, that's me on the screen. So senior consultant with Accelerator. I've been with Accelerator now for a couple of years. Prior to that, I spent the majority of my adult working life in the public sector, notably policing. So 32 years with Thames Valley Police down in Berkshire, Buckinghamshire and Oxfordshire. Concluded that career 8 years ago now, which doesn't seem possible. That's absolutely flown by. As a superintendent was my final rank, in charge of West Berkshire and Reading, Newbury. I'm here with Accelerator today because I have some experience in chairing disciplinary processes in my past, some of which were in fact involving sexual harassment. Also, probably potentially even more importantly, or more relevant, I guess, for me, is I have two adult daughters, both of whom have been subjected to sexual harassment in their adult working lives. So a vested interest, I'm passionate in human-centered leadership, so this all dovetails into that too, I think. So good to meet you, folks.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sarah Adderley. I'm also a former police officer. Not as much service as Stuart. I decided to leave the force in 2019 after 14 years, but I trained as a first responder to support victims of sexual offences, including workplace sexual harassment. And additionally, as someone who has personally experienced sexual harassment in the workplace, this is a topic I feel deeply passionate about. So it's an honour to be here today to discuss the new sexual harassment duty and explore how we can create safer and more respectful workplaces. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm Jacqueline, as you know, everybody calls me Jack. And I come from an HR background. I've been sort of a head of HR roles. I've been in HR for 25 sort of years. Much of that spent within the construction industry and then in the leisure sector more recently. So obviously, I've been looking at this from the point of being that head of HR. What happens when these cases come across your desk, which is kind of one of the worst headaches of HR. Just looking at it from a legal perspective and a risk perspective. Welcome. Okay, so I'm going to kick off on this first slide here really and say what is sexual harassment. And I think the key word here is about it being unwanted behaviour of a sexual nature. There isn't a kind of big tick list that we can say, yes, that was, or yes, that wasn't. Every situation will depend on what happened. But really, it's any behaviour that makes someone feel scared or humiliated or intimidated. We've got some examples there on the right as to what that could look like. Some of the really obvious ones, if that's the right word to use, obviously sexual advances, asking for sexual favours. But then some of those other points, I think really we can look at in terms of, you know, the world has changed in terms of texts, in terms of Snapchat, things like that, in sending inappropriate messages, you know, touching people obviously against their will, what's okay, what isn't, even things like asking questions about somebody's sex life, and of course making sexual comments, either about someone's sexual orientation or their gender. You know, it's just a kind of whole big picture of just anything that is unwanted or inappropriate, really, I think kind of sums it up. You know, I've been looking at some example cases in preparation for this, and lots of the cases, it is these kind of smaller kind of things that build up. You know, there's one award that was issued last year to some £43,000 was awarded, where the restaurant owner had just been creepy, the girl said, towards him, you know, helping her put her radio on in her uniform, you know, keep offering her lifts home, you know, offering her extra money that he wasn't offering other people. All those things can go to build up things like that. There's another case was awarded £79,000, which was a male chef. And he complained that another male chef was just kind of grabbing him, hugging him every time he walked past him in the kitchen, kind of kissing him on the forehead, mucking around. So, yeah, this is just to say it's not always what we think might be the obvious thing. So, statistics, as Toby mentioned. We've been looking around some statistics, and there are some quite shocking statistics there, aren't they? 72% of the UK population has experienced some form of sexual harassment, with 58% of them being women in the workplace. But I think a really key point here is the next one. Actually, 15% of those only have reported it. So I think there's kind of a point around there about being an employer and giving people the opportunity to report it. Over the last few years, there has been a steady 7% increase on the number of sexual harassment cases reaching tribunal. So that might indicate that people are beginning to start to raise those things. I mentioned a couple of cases that were in those figure range. That's the 32 to 80 is sort of the range of payouts from tribunals in the last couple of years. And rather frighteningly, one large payout against the National Grid last year for £350,000. Absolutely huge amount of money. And very interesting around that case was actually not what originally had occurred, but the fact that the business kept denying it and denied her, you know, grievance, denied to do a disciplinary against him, that they continually rejected it up until the point of tribunal. That's what made that one so shockingly high. So interesting from an employer point of view. So what are the changes? As you'll all know, on the news from the 26th of October, the legislation changed around this. And this is an adaptation to the original Equality Act of 2010. But it puts a new duty on employers to take reasonable steps. And it's that key reasonable steps that is the part that's new, to prevent sexual harassment before it occurs. There's obviously always been legislation in place. There's always been sexual harassment legislation in place. But previously, an employer was only required to act to a complaint after it had happened. This new stipulation completely turns that around and says you must put in reasonable steps before it happens. The other key part that they've brought in is that an employer, so employee there, so employer has a responsibility to prevent harassment from third parties. Now that is new as well. Now that could mean, you know, your customers, your delivery people, even delegates at a conference. So an employer has to protect their employees from harassment from their third parties, or at least put in reasonable steps to show that they tried. If a claim came to a tribunal, the other new element to this is that the tribunals are now allowed to award a further 20% uplift onto any compensation that has given. So should it have got that far and that the complainant was awarded, damages to feelings, the tribunal could uplift that by 25% if the company had failed to put in those reasonable steps, or it deemed they failed to put in the steps. So it really is putting that emphasis onto organisations to have their house in order.
Okay, thank you, Jack. So what I'd like you all to do now, it's not fingers on the buzzers, but it's going to be answers in the chat. So I'd love you to all just open up the chat now and answer the following question. So which of the following behaviours would be deemed as sexual harassment under the new UK legislation? Sexual jokes during after-work drinks at a pub, unwelcome touching in a meeting, a colleague discussing their own sex life, or someone standing uncomfortably close. I feel like I'm on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. So please, answers in the chat. Let's have a look. What's everyone put? Okay, so Jack's put all of them really, right? Okay, Louise, surely not sexual jokes after work. Louise, all. Phil, all. Henry, all. Okay, question mark there, Henry. What about everyone else? All, okay, all of them. So getting lots of all of them then. And you know what? You are dead right, because all of them are deemed as sexual harassment if they are unwanted and cause distress or discomfort to the recipient. Additionally, the legal framework, particularly as Jack just stipulated under the Equality Act 2010, emphasises the importance of the impact on individuals, which also includes those directly experiencing the behaviour and potentially others in the vicinity who find it offensive. So it's not necessarily the person that you are aiming this at, it's the person in the pub that overhears those sexual jokes. And while the behaviour may not directly target someone, if it causes offence or discomfort to bystanders, it can still contribute to a hostile work environment. And this aligns with the legal principle of considering impact over intent. Okay, so Stuart is going to talk you through a scenario.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, so this one perhaps not quite so cut and dried, maybe. So we'll have a look at it. That's why we've only given you 3 to choose from rather than 4 here, to perhaps make it a little bit simpler. So this is an after party event, so quite topical. We've mentioned a Christmas party on there. They'll be happening, no doubt, to a place near you pretty soon, if you haven't already. So this time of year when the office parties take place. But here we're talking about an after party. So the Christmas party's taken place. Colleague then confides in you that somebody's made inappropriate suggestions or comments having had a few drinks. However, this occurred when some of the party goers moved on to a nightclub following the official event, so the official works do, the Christmas party. So thinking back to what we've just heard from Sarah and Jack there in terms of vicarious liability of employers as opposed to the individual themselves, or even the group if it's a group setting. To what extent do you believe the company is responsible for this behaviour then? A, yes. B, no. C, no. And the yes is quantified by the fact that the gathering was instigated by the company and the behaviour could still be linked to the workplace. Let's have a look. We got a yes from Louise, A from Phil, A from Julia, A from Jack. So we've got quite a few yeses in there. Just waiting for Toby. I can see you furiously typing on that keyboard there, Toby. C for Toby, because it's happened after the event. Okay, now we mentioned at the start, this one maybe has some grey areas. So because this is new legislation, quite often when new legislation is introduced, sometimes there are some tests that need to be applied later on. So once the complaint has been made, the investigation has taken place, perhaps it ends up at an employment tribunal or even in a criminal trial, perhaps. Then sometimes what happens on those occasions is that the head of the tribunal, the judge or the magistrate in a criminal setting we'll introduce something called a stated case. So we can have definitive legislation on the back of grey areas once decided by a court. This might be one of those areas here to think about. The answer actually is A, but of course it would depend very much on where it took place, who organised it, who attended, the level of responsibility and knowledge that was at play at that point by the employers. And all of that will influence the tribunal's decision whether or not it was in inverted commas, in the course of employment. So this might be a classic case for a stated case where they say, actually, an after-party event, if it's held within the knowledge of the employer and rubber stamped by the employer, may well be in the course of the employment, in which case the law would then apply here. So that's the answer for this one. Yes, so well done. So nice try, Henry. Actually, I think first of all, if I hadn't have actually studied the new legislation, I would probably have gone for that one myself, actually. So it just shows you how things have changed.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you, Stuart. So Jack, over to you.
Yes, I mentioned earlier, obviously, you know, the world has moved on, and things like text messages and Snapchats and all things like that, obviously now are really important in these sort of matters. So have a looking at this one. If somebody starts receiving unsolicited text messages from a colleague, being a bit suggestive, you know, you looked great tonight, let's go out again, I can't stop thinking about you. And Jane responds, and she is just feeling really uncomfortable about it, and she speaks with HR. What do you think an employer should do under that new legal duty? Investigate, take some action. Might be a disciplinary procedure. Obviously, you wouldn't know till you'd investigated. Do nothing. It's outside work. It's texts. You know, we can't control who texts each other. Just say, oh, Jane, you know, just block his number. Let's sort it out privately. Or you can just hope it'll resolve itself without intervention. Or maybe suggest that Jane says something to Ben. What do we think?
So people have been putting in the chat, Jack, and lots of A's. So I think
lots of A's. We're all being cautious.
Let's get this allegation investigated and let's do something about it.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, as say, coming from an HR background, it's always best to investigate, at least investigate, find out what's happening, and then take some action.
Absolutely. And I think it's really important to clarify with employees that harassment can take form, and it can take place over any form. That's whether it's email, text, Snapchat, WhatsApp, it's not just in person. Okay, so final scenario then, quite prevalent at the moment, especially with what's going on in the media. So Jordan, he recently transitioned, he now works as a project manager. He's been experiencing uncomfortable comments from a colleague, Tom, over several weeks. One day during a team meeting, Tom says, I just don't get it. You were a man before and now you're a woman. How does that even work? Over time, Tom's behaviour escalates with repeated inappropriate comments about Jordan's transition and body, often using incorrect pronouns. The situation worsens when, during a conversation, Tom grabs Jordan's shoulder without consent and says, it's hard to believe you were really a woman. What would you do in this instance as an employer? Would you investigate? Would you ignore? Lots of A's coming into the chat.
We've got a bit of an A theme going on with our scenarios.
We have got a lot.
Yeah, we should have mixed them up a bit.
Should have mixed up the answers there. Definitely should have mixed up the answers. And it is A is the only response that aligns with the employer's legal duty under the Equality Act 2010, which protects against harassment based on gender reassignment, but it also addresses the physical contact. And this is the reason that we wanted to put this scenario in, because ultimately harassment, there is a very fine line between harassment and sexual assault, you know, and assault, in that, you know, let's say, for instance, someone is being oppressive and, you know, perhaps they are flirting, but it's in an uncomfortable way. You know, let's go back to all of the scenarios that we've just been through. But then someone, for instance, grabs someone else, and, you know, they haven't invited that. It's you know, intentional. They've intentionally grabbed someone. You know, it's really hard to believe that you were a woman. Then that's when it crosses the line. That's when it's not just sexual harassment anymore, but it's also assault. And ultimately, as an employer, you also have to consider that duty of reporting the matter to the police. I mean, ultimately, it's up to the victim to do that. We have to be respectful of their wishes. But similarly, that's something that's really, really valuable and to take into consideration as well. Okay.
Can I just add something to the mix there very quickly, sir? Because it might actually wander into the Harassment Act, which is a specific piece of legislation which talks about harassment. It doesn't prefix it with the word sexual, but actually sexual harassment, if it becomes a course of conduct, might well become harassment in the purest sense of the legislation anyway, and therefore a criminal offence.
Absolutely, yeah. So as well as the Harassment Act, you've also got the fact that this person has committed an assault as well. So you've also got the other implications as well. And it really does you've got to look at the bigger picture as an employer. That is your responsibility. Okay, right. Well, thank you, everyone. You've not won £1 million, but I am going to introduce you to the next slide, which is the key takeaways from this webinar. And so back over to you, Jack.
Thank you. Which is much less interesting than £1 million. Okay, so thinking about as an employer, say what we've seen is that this new duty is to put in reasonable steps. That whatever's reasonable will be tested at the tribunal if anything should get that far. But those reasonable measures will vary between employers. It will depend on the size of your organisation, the sector that you're in, really, as to what would be expected of you. But really, overall, I think we can pretty much say if you went ahead and did all of these things, you'd be kind of covering yourself. So review your sexual harassment policy, bring in this new legislation, check that you've got your policy up to date. They will all need updated after this October law. So make sure, I would say also, that your staff understand what might constitute sexual harassment. We've looked at some examples of sometimes it might be these little comments, little touches, so make sure that they all understand. Put some training in, training for the managers and all the members of staff, really. And I think what we have seen, what the legal organisations have been talking about, is that they don't feel a sort of quick tick box, maybe online quick session will be enough to cover that. Might not be enough to stand behind that. So when you're looking at training, look at what is suitable for your organisation, what will work for you. Another key point is to put in some safe mechanisms. We saw how few people were actually reporting sexual harassment. So make some very clear mechanisms that your staff know how and where they can report it, and particularly they can report it safely without being dismissed. I don't mean legally dismissed, I mean the allegation being dismissed or not taken seriously. Look at your culture and see if you think that there might be areas of risk where anything might be occurring. Obviously raise awareness amongst your staff and really just look at building this really safe working environment. Assess where any risk might be, really. So there are a good few sort of key things that we can put in place to make sure that we have covered this off as an employer. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, Jack. Okay, so just to finish, I'll hand you back to Toby.
Great, thanks, Sarah, Jack, Stuart. Hopefully people found that insightful, and even if there was just 1 or 2 takeaways from that helps someone from an organizational perspective, that's really what we wanted to get out of this. I think most of you know who we are, but just wanted to spend just a second just reintroducing or introducing Accelerator to the people on the call. So most of you know we're a global consultancy, and we have a real foundational belief that people are the greatest asset that any business has. So we offer training, consulting, and research. And how we're helping in this regard. So like I said at the start, we've had a number of clients proactively reach out to us off the back of the changes in October. So we've created some Power Hour and Mighty 90 trainings that are immersive and interactive training supported by some e-learning, just double underlining what Jack said. What we're kind of seeing from a HR perspective that e-learning alone and a tick box to get this done is probably not going to stand the test of time during a tribunal. So trying to make it a bit more all-encompassing, proactive and immersive for the staff, for both managers and the team. And we're offering a HR policy review as well. So Jack and the HR team will happily look at people's policies, provide input, and where applicable, provide any support in rewriting policies for various organisations. All that's left to say is a big thank you for everyone, for the guys who created the materials and presented, and for everyone taking half an hour on a Friday over their lunch break to join. We'll send out the materials, we'll send out the recording if you want to share it wider in your organisation. And if you have any further questions, we'll keep the webinar open for 10 minutes if anyone has any specific questions off the back of this, or has a question that they wanted to ask either Jack from a HR perspective or our two trainers, Sarah and Stuart. If not, you know where we are. We'll send out a follow-up probably on Monday, just say thank you with the recording and the materials, and look forward to seeing everyone hopefully very soon. And if not, have a lovely weekend.